There's me. Hi.
It's not. Okay, hi everybody. So this is the first streaming episode of App Academy Live. I hope that you guys can see us, that you can hear us. We have a little bit of a technical issue going on, and so we're just going to try to do this. Hopefully it goes well. What we're going to do today is that we're going to talk to App Academy's own Rose Koron. Is it Koron or Koron?
Koron.
Koron, cool. So Rose is one of App Academy's best instructors, and she's super cool. See, one of the things that we're talking about now, the lights went off. It's streaming, it's live, it's crazy. But we're going to talk about GitHub and why it's really important in becoming a programmer. And we're going to go through what it is, why it matters, and how you learn it at App Academy, right?
Totally.
And also just maybe in general for all types of programmers. So we're going to go through a lot of, well, maybe not a lot, maybe a few questions that we've written here for people that are interested in coding, right? And we're also would like to say that we're also streaming through several networks, including Twitch, Facebook, and Periscope, but we're not 100% sure. Again, we have technical issues. So
we at least got one. We know we're on Twitch.
So
if you're on Twitch, you're watching us.
That's right. So I'm going to go through a couple of checks to make sure that we're okay, and then we're going to start. Okay? And yeah. So while I do that, Rose, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to App Academy?
Yeah.
And a little bit about your background.
Totally. So my name is Rose Koron, and I am a curriculum developer here at App Academy. I started my journey into software engineering probably about 2 years ago now. I was previously working as a dog walker. I was actually the manager of a local Bay Area dog walking company. And I found one day, I was like, you know, I love dogs. I could do this for the rest of my life, but I'm looking for something a little more challenging.
That's great.
So I kind of was looking into a bunch of things, dabbling, and I applied to App Academy on a whim. And, you know, then I got an email back like, hey, are you interested? And I said, oh, I have to get serious. I have an interview coming up. So I buckled down, and here I am today.
That's incredible. What made you make the change from what you were doing, even though hanging around dogs all day sounds incredible? What made you want to change and get into the programming industry?
I think from hearing my friends and knowing a couple of people who were in the industry, it sounded like they were solving really interesting problems. And I've always been kind of like a hands-on problem solver myself. So hearing the kind of work they were doing on a day-by-day basis, I was like, wow, that's really interesting. And I want a chunk of that. I want to tackle problems like that and help more people that I'm currently helping.
That's great. And what made you choose App Academy over other options? Because there are several.
Yeah, no, there are definitely a bunch of options. I will say that having a past alumni as a boyfriend definitely made me a little bit biased because I knew that App Academy worked just by knowing him and knowing several of his cohort mates. But after doing my research, App Academy had wonderful numbers, and I was like, oh, you know, their acceptance rate is very small, but it seems like they have a very high placement rate. And that's what really drew me to App Academy, knowing that, you know, I would probably get a job, and here I am with a job, so.
Awesome, cool. So now, after attending the boot camp and you were one of the best students, App Academy offered you the opportunity to start teaching other students, which is really interesting. So tell us quickly about that experience, which has been how many months now?
It's been about 6 months.
Okay. And I'm sure that has improved even your understanding of the original curriculum of App Academy, right?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think when I graduated, I was at a certain level, but, you know, teaching really brings you to the next.
Yeah.
Because one of the main things that we always talk about with pair programming, which was one of the main things that we always say is great about App Academy, is you have to teach your partner. And you really learn more about what you don't know through trying to teach it to someone else. So becoming an instructor here really taught me about what I wasn't super solid on and made me that much better and really made me like strive to become a better software engineer, not only for myself, but for my students.
Great. Well, thank you for that. So let's get into the GitHub. GitHub is a tool that is used by programmers. It has been around for almost 10 years now, right? Let's get into what it is and why it's important. So let me look at some of the questions. So tell me about how important it is for somebody starting out in the industry to know about GitHub and how it is incorporated into the programming lifestyle.
Totally.
Yeah.
So I would say GitHub is extremely important, just for the fact that so many companies use GitHub. So if you do want to get into this industry, it's very important to know something that a lot of companies expect you to know upon entering the job. And I'd say just for yourself, GitHub is, or not specifically GitHub, but Git, the version control system, is really useful to know because it allows you to save your project at several states while you're working. So it kind of eliminates the fear of, oh my God, I broke this, there's no way to go back. I can't Command-Z my way to victory. Git really eliminates that, and you know you can proceed forth without affecting your prior work, and you can go back there if you really feel like you need to know what was happening or if something was working and then broke. It frees you up to work more creatively, I feel.
Give me an example of that. What does it mean to work more creatively when you don't have a full understanding, perhaps, of what coding is?
Totally.
And maybe you can give us an example of what App Academy does in order to develop that.
Yeah. So as a beginning software engineer, I would, do a solution to a problem and say, okay, I don't want to touch this because it works. I don't want to break it. What Git allows you to do is you can save that work as it currently is. You could push it up to GitHub if you wanted to, which basically means just creating another copy of it. Or what I frequently do in my own workflow, even nowadays, is to create a separate branch, which basically means I'm going away, but the original work is still there. I can still go back there if I need to, but I can play around here, and it won't affect my original work. So it allows you to play around without the fear of like, oh my God, I broke it forever, and I don't know what I originally did.
So that's a great way to introduce people to GitHub. Tell us more about the specific terms that you kind of teach students right away.
Gotcha.
So like some of the main things such as, we'll get into bug tracking in a little bit, but you mentioned version control. What is source code management, right? These important terms that you become familiar with once you become a programmer. Why don't you explain what those are? So we're kind of backtracking a little bit, and then go into some of the terms that are specific to GitHub.
Got you. So a version control system is basically like if you were, a great example I always use is if you're working on a Word document and you are consistently working on it and you're saving it and you're saving like a version of it. And if you ever go back, you can see like your past revision history and you can make the document look like what it used to look like. So using Git is kind of like that. It allows you to see the different versions of your work and save as you go through. We call it, in Git terminology, that's called committing. But it's basically just saving your work as it currently is before you move forward. And that's a version control system. As far as a source code management,
Mm-hmm.
Source code management basically refers to the way you can collaborate with others. So if you're working on a team of developers, you don't all want to be working on the exact same project at the exact same time because, you don't all want to share one computer. That sounds bad and not fun for anyone. So the way that you can collaborate better with your fellow developers is by pushing your code up to a central code base, which we usually use GitHub, but you can use other sites for this too. You can use like Bitbucket. Just some copy of your code that's in a central location that everybody can access from the team. And then you have your own local copy that you can work on and make changes to. And then once you're done with whatever you're working on, you save those changes, and then you can, we call this in Git push, but you basically just take your changes and put them into the main central code base.
Mm.
And then other developers on the team can take your changes or pull them down to their local copies.
Interesting. How early is the GitHub conversation happening at App Academy?
GitHub is on week 1, day 4. We do not
Which was
slow
yesterday,
down.
right?
Yeah, which was yesterday for our San Francisco cohort.
Yeah.
Git is an incredibly important topic. So we want our students to really learn early and start using it every day. And they do use it every single day because it is how they keep track of all their classwork and homework. And it also starts building up a lovely commit history, which when you look at any profile on GitHub for any developer, you can see their commit history as like a series of green squares. We tell our students more green squares makes you look like a more productive developer.
Interesting. Tell us about how GitHub, well, let me rephrase that question. What are the biggest challenges that early students of the bootcamp have when it comes to committing or maybe just the version control aspect of programming?
Definitely. I think for all early students learning how to use GitHub, just developing good Git habits is probably the most difficult thing, just because you forget to frequently commit, and committing means saving. But if you don't save a lot, then you don't have past versions to go check back on. So I think that's the hardest part of GitHub of Git is getting into that good workflow of committing often, saving often, and making sure that you can go back to all these past versions.
Tell me about why Git is important, or GitHub is important when it comes to kind of the long-range programming as a career, right? You mentioned that we have versions that there's history, right? And if this is like the beginning of what you're thinking about doing as a career, I mean, it's funny thinking about, if you were in a career for 10 years and somebody was evaluating you for a job, there's your GitHub potentially, right? Not potentially, it actually is what happens.
No, that's like the first thing they look at.
It's the first things they look at, yeah.
On your, whatever you're applying for, they're always like, okay, put your GitHub link right here, because that's what I'm going to be looking at.
Yeah. So, so then tell me about how that affects the way that App Academy teaches GitHub, if it does, because it's all public facing. And I suppose that's also the way that programming is. Right? You are creating websites, people look up your code. A lot of programming from the very beginning has been about open source coding, and people can look up what you've done many years ago. Totally. So how does that connect to maybe the operating values of a programming education?
Yeah. I think whenever an interviewer or recruiter is looking at your GitHub or looking at your resume, what they're really looking to see is that you are still working, that you are constantly working on new projects, learning new ideas, building things not just for a class or for your bootcamp, but building things for yourself that you think are interesting. So I think GitHub is really important because it does give you that central location where you can see oh, this person has recently been working with Swift. Maybe they're interested in development with mobile apps, or this person just built this really cool, like, API that sends you dog pictures. Like, I like dogs. Maybe we can talk about that.
Yeah. It's funny how you brought the conversation back to dogs.
Whenever you got to think of an example of anything.
That's right.
Dog.
Awesome. All right, let's look at some of the other questions that we had for you here.
Sure.
Let's get actually to the very kind of the nitty-gritty of the use of GitHub.
Totally.
What do you have to do? Maybe like it'll sound silly for a lot of programmers, but since a lot of people that are watching this don't know anything about it, what do you actually have to do? Do you sign up? Do you download your GitHub to your laptop?
Mm-hmm.
How do you actually use it? What's the process?
Totally. So there are a couple of processes, and one of the really nice things about GitHub is there is so many guides on how to set up Git and GitHub because it is such a well-used resource that many people have been just building these guides for free and giving them out to new and beginning programmers because they want to get more people interested in the field. But basically, to use GitHub, you have to make an account. And then from there, you can use their website itself if you want to start writing in Markdown. But if you don't know what Markdown is, and you probably don't only want to be writing Markdown files, you'll probably want to download Git, which is the version control system. GitHub is the website. Git is the version control system, which allows you to do the cool saving and stuff. So you want to download Git onto your laptop, and you can do that through a variety of different ways. If you just look up download Git for whatever your certain laptop is, I'm sure something will pop up and tell you how to download it. And then you can use either your command line interface or what other variety of tools that you have at your disposal in order to save the files from whatever project you're working on to Git, and then you can push them up, or you can just, I'm going to use the terminology push. I promise you get to it really quickly if you learn GitHub. You can push your work up to GitHub.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So tell me about bug tracking. I know that GitHub is used for bug tracking. So what is the role that it plays in daily programming work? And please explain how GitHub can help you track bugs.
Yeah.
It's a big part of what people do in their jobs as programmers.
Totally. Yeah, no, bug tracking is a huge issue for whatever company, big, small, doesn't matter. There's always going to be some little thing that could be just a little bit better. So GitHub has a built-in system called Issues that you can use to track the progress of any particular bug at any time. Basically, a user just submits a issue, and it's super simple. It's basically you just click on Issues, create a new issue, and then you put in like description of the issue, and you can assign it to somebody if you know a particular person on the team that deals with those kinds of things, or you just assign it to like the general repository itself or the project itself, and it just allows you to have like a concrete documentation of like this issue was submitted on this day, was signed to this person, and they can update it and say whether it's done or not. There's a lot of different services for this too. We at App Academy personally use Jira, which is an Atlassian product. But
project manager.
And project manager.
Yep.
But there's a lot of different services you can use for this. GitHub is just nice because it's already where you're putting your code, so you don't have to be looking anywhere else. But basically, anything that can give you concrete documentation of where this bug is happening and when this issue was submitted for proper tracking and keeping the process as frictionless as possible is what you're looking for. Cool.
Let's talk a little bit further about some of these terms that, again, they're kind of in the ether. People hear about them, GitHub, programming. What are forked repositories? And I put in my notes, it's not a private pill that's been stabbed by a metal utensil, right?
It is not.
I hope somebody laughed at that joke.
I laughed.
Thank you.
A forked repository basically means a copy of somebody else's project or your own project that is on your local machine. So you can go to a repository for any big project, small project, and download a local copy that you can then mess around with,
Right.
do whatever you wish, and it will not affect the central copy that is on GitHub.
Interesting. Again, kind of the main ethos of this is, as a programmer, you're working really hard on things, but you also want to experiment.
Yeah,
You want to try things without potentially messing things up.
Yeah,
right?
you, Jose, could make an interesting project, and I'm like, oh, that's cool. Let
Yeah.
me take my local copy of that and try add in more stuff to it and see.
And actually make it work. Yeah. So, interesting. Okay, so thank you for that. Let's talk about, let's see. This was actually a user-submitted question was, do certain companies force programmers to use GitHub, or do they not care? How does that work in terms of the day-to-day work? And the light went off.
It's dramatic effect.
Good times.
It really depends on the company.
Yeah.
Every company will have their own workflow, and that's just part of like coming into a new company. I'm sure a lot of companies GitHub, but companies might have their own internal tools.
Interesting.
It really just depends on whichever company you're applying for or whichever company you're working with. They'll always have their own internal workflow, and you got to follow along with that to make everything work as well as possible.
Cool. Thank you. Kind of an inside baseball question that may or may not be relevant to super early students, but, excuse me, Microsoft bought GitHub early last year, and I'm a person that's online a lot, checking out Twitter and stuff. There were a lot of programmers that were angry or concerned, let's say, about that acquisition. Why was that the case?
I think people were concerned because of a couple of reasons. One of the things you can point to Microsoft owning and then not making better is definitely a service like Skype. Microsoft acquired Skype, and then Skype stayed exactly the same for years and years and years and did not continually improve. And people are afraid that the same thing might happen to GitHub.
So sort of monetizing a product that has been incredibly useful for many, many years without a focus on improving it.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So that's one concern.
Yeah.
I'd say another one is probably a lot of people being concerned for their data. Data is valuable, and Microsoft is a large company that can probably do a lot of interesting things taking user-based data off of GitHub. So a lot of people are probably a little bit freaked out about what the possibilities of that could be. Yeah.
But it almost feels like that's just, it's almost too worrisome potentially, right? Because it's, again, we're talking about open source, a business that has been around for 10 years based off of being open, I guess, and really being available to programmers is a great tool. But it's maybe a valid concern. So let's look at a couple of other questions. Last year, around this time, GitHub fell prey to what was described by many news outlets as a very serious DDoS attack, the largest in history, in fact, according to the New York Times. Do you know what that attack was about? Why was it important? I'm guessing this was the data that you mentioned. And what can people interested in the process of building software learn from that attack?
Yeah. So, as you said, I think the reason that the attack, like what they were going for with the attack, was probably all of the data, because it's not just private developers either. It's large companies like Facebook and Apple, and the developers who work there also have their own private GitHubs.
Yeah.
There's a lot of information on GitHub that could be potentially very valuable. That being said, so that's why it's important. It's also important because it was the largest DDoS attack in history. That's pretty crazy. And it was aimed at GitHub, so that's very interesting within itself. So I guess it's pretty much like why it's important. The things that we can learn from it probably will most be focused on how GitHub handled the problem and what they're going to be doing to counter this kind of problem moving forward. I know that GitHub was down for like about 5 minutes, And if you read the report that they released, it's pretty interesting, the specific measures that they're trying to take to make sure this kind of thing doesn't happen again. Just automating a lot more services, making sure that humans don't have to be the ones who are, in charge of making those kinds of decisions, and slowing down that kind of triggering of, this is a huge thing that's happening and we need to make sure that resources are going towards this. So it's going to be interesting to see how GitHub continually increases their own security, and it's a lesson to be learned for software developers in the future, how to better build their own projects to resist these kinds of attacks.
Great, thank you. Let's see. We have 2 or 3 questions that are left. Okay. Are the social network aspects of GitHub important? I know that it includes feeds, followers, wikis, and a social network graph. What are each of those things, and why are they good to know?
So it kind of depends who you are on GitHub. If you are an interviewer, you're probably looking at whoever you're interviewing and seeing like, oh, how many stars do their repos have? Do other people value this person's work? Seeing who they follow, seeing there was feeds, there was follows.
Yep.
Missed a couple.
There were feeds, followers, and wikis, right?
Wikis are very important.
Let's get into wikis.
Yeah, wikis are incredibly important.
Why are they important, and how are they used?
Wikis are super important because it's more documentation.
Yeah.
It's basically giving, hopefully, well laid out documentation for exactly what each of your projects does, how to use it, and maybe what future developments on this project might be. It basically just shows the kind of developer you are. If you have a really well laid out wiki, it shows that you're probably very thorough and that you are taking these kinds of things into account, thinking about who might be looking at this in the future.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that we have not discussed about GitHub that you think it's important, especially for people thinking about making the switch potentially to a programming career? Yeah.
Well, I will say, I know there was a big announcement lately that GitHub now has private repos or private repositories for free, whereas before it used to be $7 a month. So that means it's even easier to become a beginner programmer, because if you don't necessarily want your work to be shown to the world yet, you can make a private repository instead of having it public, and you don't have to pay for it. So I think as a starting programmer, I would have found that very reassuring, because I know in the beginning I was like, no one look at this yet.
I
haven't made it perfect yet.
Yeah.
So for beginning software engineers, I think that's just another incentive to you're not even putting any money down. No one's gonna see it. Just try it out. See if you like it. Have fun with it.
Cool. How early do you recommend a potential student, get into understanding GitHub and that part of programming? We know that it's not just potential boot camps like App Academy, but there's free code camp. There's a lot of free stuff out there that people can read up on to find out about whether they want to do this or not. So how early should they do that, I guess, in the programming cycle or the journey of becoming a programmer?
I think as soon as possible, because honestly, if you begin programming, you want to have a copy of your code that isn't just on your computer. Because say your computer catches fire or floods or you lost it in an airport, you want to make sure you still have a copy of those files. And the sooner you learn Git, the sooner you can be able to download your work from anywhere. And it just really frees you up to have less stress than is necessary.
Awesome.
Also, for students, I very much recommend learning Git concepts before you come in, because, you always want to be one step ahead of the game.
Great. Great. Thanks so much, Rose.
Yeah.
I think that we're good. Let me just double check that we don't have any other questions from people watching this feed. Let's see. Dun-dun-dun. Let's see. If you want to check too, if we've had any. Oops.
Oh, I see it. There it was. There it is.
We're
right
still
now.
on there. Okay.
We're still on there. I don't see any questions though.
Okay. Well, if you have any questions, please send them over to us. You can send them on our Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, or YouTube accounts, and we're happy to answer them. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thanks, y'all.